Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 328 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is relationships. Our quote of the day comes to us from Tom Peters. Leaders understand the ultimate power of relationships. If you have yet to subscribe to our podcast or left us a 5-star review, please do so, as that allows our podcast to reach a much wider audience. In January, I had the privilege of being on Casanova Brooks' podcast, and I'm really glad that he took the time to return the favor. When it comes to relationships and adding value, that could be Casanova's middle name. I know you will enjoy today's episode. Casanova, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you, my brother, and I'm excited to just share the stage with you today.
I appreciate it. I had the honor and privilege of being on your show a couple weeks ago, and it's always fun when we get to return the favor. First question I ask each guest is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Absolutely, no question.
So as you know, the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners. And I was curious if you yourself have either a no-quit story or perhaps a really challenging time where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Yeah, I think the way that most people come to like me, know me, and trust me is they understand that I'm no stranger to adversity. I think I've experienced so many highs in my lifetime, in the short lifetime, but definitely experienced a lot more lows. And so to give you a little bit of a background on that, I'm originally from south side of Chicago, raised by a single mom. My grandma stepped in to try to be that father figure in my life, so I'm very close to my grandma. But the reason being is because my dad wasn't around, and last I knew, I had 13 brothers and sisters on my dad's side, but on my mom's side, I was the only child. So I always grew up, and my dad's still alive from what I know, and he's still in Chicago, which is where, I was raised, but I always grew up and I was wondering, why my dad never wanted to have a relationship with me, right? And I think at times that made me feel a little bit inferior because you would always think I'm his seed, but yet he never wanted to empower me, encourage me, tell me, hey, I love you. Maybe I can't do for you, but I love you. So that was a big deal for me growing up. But then when I was 8 years old, I really experienced my first step of adversity. And so I had two best friends. I did everything with them. We were the Three Musketeers, three amigos, and one morning they come over and they say, hey, you know what, we're about to go to the beach, and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna sit this one out. And come to find out, shorten up this part of the story, a couple hours later they wound up drowning off of the pier at Lake Michigan and at the beach. And so for me, that was my first time that I was like, man, I had to have a pivot. I was then looked at as a victim because obviously everybody else is like, oh man, are you okay? And so I had to figure out my identity and who I was and not just giving up and feeling like I was going to live life in a scarcity mindset that I was some type of a victim. And then so fast forward a couple years later, now all I'm seeing is drugs, gangs, violence, the whole 9 yards. And my grandma's seeing that becomes my surrounding too. Not that I'm in it, but you can kind of see the trajectory where it's going for me. And so she makes the decision to go to Sioux City, Iowa to check it out because some of my family had migrated there over the last year. And we go hop on a Greyhound, go check out Sioux City for a weekend. And next thing I know, we come back home, and the next 2 weeks, all of my stuff is being packed into a Greyhound, and I'm being moved to Sioux City, Iowa. So huge culture change for me, as you can imagine. Go from only seeing people who look like me, big city Chicago, to now going to a town of 80,000 people, no one who looks like me. I'm surrounded by cattle and cornfields. And I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do here? But I say that there was a silver lining in that, right? There's a silver lining in everything. And for me, what that silver lining is it gave me the blessing of not growing up with an ignorant mindset. And so what do I mean by that? I didn't grow up thinking that just because you don't look like me, that doesn't mean that you have to be against me and there's no way you can be with me. And so I was forced early on to build relationships with people who didn't look like me. And I think that was one of the best things that still serve me today. So anyway, I'm now navigating through this. I'm in the high school now. I'm a pretty popular kid, basketball, football, track, dance squad. I'm doing a lot of different things. And I find myself my sophomore year in high school, just walking through the hallways and I'm having a hard time breathing. And I'm telling my buddies and they're like, oh man, it's probably because you left football early. Basketball just started up, we're conditioning, you're probably just out of shape. And I'm like, all right, you're probably right. But then I was going home and I was taking a lot of naps and my mom's like, hey, what's up? This is unlike you. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just really tired. And she's like, okay, well, if this persists, we're going to go to the doctor. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't really that scared of whatever it was because as a child, I was never, ever sick. I never had chicken pox, measles, broke a bone. I never had coronavirus. I was always pretty good. And so then when we go to the hospital and we go check it out, they're like, hey, it's something to do with breathing. We're probably going to keep you guys, a little bit longer and do a lot more tests. So I'm like, okay, all I had in my mind from what I saw on TV was I'm going to get hot nurses. I'm going to get a sponge bath. I'm going to get ice cream, video games, and I'll be out of here back to school tomorrow. And I remember they wound up coming in later on that night and they're saying, hey, you know what? We have public transportation. We're going to ship you over to the University of Iowa, other side of the state, because we think it might be a little bit more serious. And I remember my mom's like, well, what is more serious? And they're like, we think he might have cancer. And I just remember my grandma saying, whoa. And they're like, yeah, we were doing these tests, but again, we want to ship you over. So they did that. 6 hours later, I find myself at the University of Iowa running all of these tests, and it comes out that I have stage 4 lymphoma cancer. I was 2 weeks away from death, right? They said I could have just died naturally in my sleep. It was all throughout my body. I had an emergency port that was put into my chest, which is connected to my jugular vein. And over the next 2 years, I experienced just about anything that anyone else does when it comes to the C word. And so I was like, man, so I had to navigate that. 15 to 17 years old, but I was led by 2 strong women that kind of gave me that never let them see you sweat approach. And I still to this day don't know how they were making it through with missing work and having to take me back and forth to the University of Iowa and all these other things. But yeah, so that was kind of my second storm. And then fast forward to 6.5 years ago, I went through my third and maybe biggest storm where I just moved down here to Omaha, Nebraska with my wife and son, who at the time he was 3 years old. And so I had a job opportunity. We knew nothing about Omaha, which is where we live now. We knew nothing about Omaha prior to us moving down here, but I had a job. So I took the job, crushing it at that. And then I felt like this is where I learned that in the corporate world, everybody could tell you no, but it felt like no one could tell you yes. And so I was doing all these things that they had me leading all these emerging leader programs and all these other things, and things are going well. But when I wanted to try my hand at management, since I was still so new, even though I was doing things that managements and directors, nobody else had ever did, I was like, hey, I want management. And they're like, Casanova, those positions just aren't available. Keep doing what you're doing, all these other things. So I'm like, I understand where this is going. So I wound up basically catching a YouTube video because I was going home. I was searching. I was lost. I was frustrated. And the video said, you got to find a way to be the Lord of your land. Why? Is because he or she who owns the land makes the rules. And I was like, oh, man, that's good. But keep in mind, my family, my mom, my grandma, they never owned land, house, car, business, nothing, right? No financial literacy. All I had was love. And I was like, well, how the hell am I going to be the Lord of my land? Well, I looked deeper into his story and I seen that he started out as a realtor. Then he became an investor and then developer and all these other things. So I was like, well, look, I don't know anything about selling real estate or owning land, but here's what I do know. I do know how to serve other people, build relationships with other people and help them buy, sell, and invest, right? I can learn that game. And then in return, I'll take my commissions and I'll buy my own real estate. And so that was a path that I set out on. So after I got this real estate license 3 months later, I then needed to get out of this inside sales job to then go into outside sales so I could build my real estate career because I couldn't do it from a cubicle 9 to 5. And so I get this new job in Fortune 500 company and I'm doing outside sales. And in my first month, my wife and I, we put our first house under contract that we're going to live in. So it's like, all right, this is going to be great. Well, then at the same time, my mom and grandma called me up and they say, hey, you know what? We want to move down to Omaha to be closer to you, Julie, and CJ, because there's nothing left here in Sioux City for us now that you're gone. So I'm like, all right, cool. So I talked to my wife, Julie, and a couple weeks later, We moved my mom and grandma down here. So we think all is great. Things are going to be good. Well, within 24 hours of moving my mom down here, she winds up going to the hospital here in Omaha. Within 1 week's time, I lose my mom at that hospital. And so I'm like, man, okay. And she had just turned 50. She looked really good. Most people would have never been able to know. But subsequently, just because of the transitions that I was in, my manager was like, after I come back home and I handle all the funeral arrangements, because I was up in Rochester doing the training for this new outside sales job, Rochester, New York. And so my manager was like, hey, Casanova, we need you to go back out to Rochester to finish out this training, because otherwise we got to let you go, because, you know, you basically, before you can get a territory, you have to do that. So I'm like, with all due respect, like, I can't, my grandma, my wife, my son, they all need me here. I can't go back out there right now. And she's like, I get it, but this is corporate. If you don't, I got to let you go. And so I'm like, man, think, Casanova, think. And so basically I'm like, okay, I got this real estate license. If you would, I'm closing on my first house in 3 weeks. If you would just give me 3 weeks, like allow me to put in a 3-week notice after I close on this house, I'll be out of your hair. You'll never have to hear from me again. And she's like, okay, I got you. So she allows me to do that. Basically, they're paying me for nothing. Well, we're supposed to close. We're leading up to this time. We're supposed to close on this house on a Friday. 2 days prior to that, the underwriters come back and they say, hey, we want more information from your student loans that are in deferment from the University of Iowa. And I say, oh my God. So by the time they get the information that they need, because keep in mind, for anybody listening or watching, this is post 2008. Right? So banks are a lot more strict now. So by the time they got the information that they needed, they go to re-verify employment on that Monday. And that company that I was working for says, as of last Friday, Casanova no longer works here. So then my loan officer calls me up. He's me out. And I'm like, man, well, I just met you 3 weeks ago. I can't tell you the day that you give me a loan, I'm no longer going to have a job, right? Because you would never give me the loan then. And so basically they don't approve it. And I wind up all within a matter of 2.5 weeks, I lose my mom, my job, and my home. I got no family, no friends, no church group, brand new city, brand new state. What the hell am I going to do now? So I was going to go get a W-2 job again and just start from scratch, figure it all out. My wife's like, nah, you got this real estate license. You're either going to jump all in, you're going to make something shake, or you're going to always be wondering what if, and you know how that goes for you. And I'm like, man, I know. So I jump all in. Fast forward, within the next 9 months, I did 46 deals, $8 million in volume. I got the Rookie of the Year here in Nebraska. And that's where my journey really started to take off from, as far as belief and things like that for me. And now we own multiple businesses. I've closed over $55 million in real estate. We have a real estate investing portfolio. We do a lot of things now, but that's kind of where my journey really started to take off. And those are some of the storms that I could have quit on. But my mindset never allowed me to.
That was like 14 no-quit stories all in one, so I appreciate you touching on that. But I think it shows kind of why we do our show and why I think it's been successful is everybody has a no-quit story. Obviously, some are worse than others, some are more impactful than others, but every single one of us have been challenged. And many of us have been challenged, as you have, multiple times. And it's not a question of, are you going to be challenged? It's not a question of, will you face adversity? The only real question is, how will you handle it and what will come from it? So I appreciate you expanding on that. A fun question we ask everybody is, if you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word, what word would you pick?
Resilient.
That's a fantastic word. And I think based on who you are and what you shared with us, that's probably a perfect word that defines you. One of the things we focus on is the importance of a morning routine. And I've had the opportunity of interviewing some successful people from all walks of life. And I wanted to just pick your brain real quick, see if you have a morning routine that you swear by.
So I'd be honest with you, I really don't. And I used to. And when I first got into personal development, I was looking, and I want to say, I know before we hopped on air, we were talking about a couple other successful podcasters, really successful, some of the pioneers in this game. And I remember listening to one of their shows, and somebody had said, the first thing that I do when I wake up every single morning and I get out of bed is I make my bed. right? And that was just like the smallest thing to just get a win. So if I had to say I do one thing, that's probably the one. But I would think that in the beginning, I was trying to do, I was trying to implement something that I learned that successful people do, until, just me being transparent, I came across a Jeff Bezos video. And Jeff Bezos, and obviously he's one of the talk of the world right now, depending on, when you listen or when this episode is released, because now he just stepped down from Amazon and now they're about to have a new CEO starting Q3. But anyway, I remember watching a video on YouTube, and anybody can YouTube this, but he was on a panel and somebody asked him, what's his morning routine like? And he said, for me, I do nothing that's brain intensive. I want to say before 11 a.m. which was crazy. He was like, I don't do anything that requires my thinking of my brain that's intensive before 11. He said, I do get up, I get my coffee, I'll do my walk, but I'll make breakfast for my kids, I'll make sure that they're off to school, and then I take some time just for me. He said, the problem with a lot of senior executives is they feel like that they need to be doing everything. He said, but if you really think about it, if you're any type of high-level executive, whether an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur, you really only get paid to make 2 to 3 high-level decisions every single day. Everything else should not concern you. He was like, now granted, when I first started out with Amazon, I was having to wear a lot of hats. He was like, but I quickly got myself out of that, from where I had to be the end all be all. And so for me, when I was thinking about it, and if we're going to model somebody, model arguably the most successful person in the world, right? Between him, Elon, and obviously that's all from a different perspective, right? Of what you're looking at. I'm just saying from wealth, Warren Buffett, things like that. But even Warren Buffett, when you look at it, when he gets up, he reads, what did they say? Warren Buffett's reading like 8 to 10 hours a day or something like that.
3 or 4 books a week or something crazy.
Something crazy. So that lets you know that he lives on his own schedule. So my whole point of saying that is, the biggest thing of what I could say is become self-aware of who you are. And the reason being is because you might be that person that at nighttime is when you're most energized. You might be that 10 to 2 a.m. guy, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. You might be that person that you have kids right now. And so what you need to do is you need to figure out how you can get up at 5:30 a.m. because the kids are up at 7:30 a.m. So you need to get it done before them. So I don't necessarily think that there's a morning routine, but I think it's about being self-aware. And maybe it's for you, it's right after you eat lunch and you've listened to some type of inspiration, motivation. So from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. before the kids get out of school is when you're the most effective. So you got to run at 100 miles an hour at that time, and that's got to be your time. So for me, it wasn't the morning routine. It was becoming self-aware, and it was really looking at when am I the most productive for me, and then trying to build off of that.
I love that, and I think that's such a poignant idea and concept of self-awareness, because what works for me might be completely different for you, and what works for somebody who has 3 kids that are under the age of 6 is very different than someone who has 3 kids that are teenagers that have a million activities. And you touched on something that I wanted to just unpack for a second, is being self-aware of when you are the most effective. And I think that for me has been the most important part for me, understanding my morning and evening routine, because it's what works for me. And the reason I like this question and the reason I ask it is because there is no one size fits all answer. If it was, I wouldn't ask it to every guest. I would have asked it one time, and then I just would have pressed repeat, and everyone would have been like, wow, Casanova, that's the exact same thing I do, and I know my neighbor does that. So changing lanes for a second, something that you and I spoke about before we jumped on here, something that I wanted to just touch on for a second. It's the idea of content creation versus consuming. And I think in today's day and age, technology almost changes every single day. There's a new app, there's a new website, there's a new fill in the blank. And I think we can all fall under that notion of, I need to be consuming 24/7. I need to listen to every podcast and every YouTube channel. I need to be on Clubhouse, and I need to be on Instagram and TikTok. So question for you is, for any listeners that are maybe struggling with too much content versus consuming or creating, do you have maybe a suggestion on one thing that they could do or maybe try a little bit differently?
Yeah, so I think for me, I've struggled with that as well, because for some people, it is just really trying to stay cutting edge, right? You want to figure out what I wouldn't necessarily say the competition, because your real only competition is yourself. But at the same time, you want to see when you get exposed to different perspectives, or when you get exposed to different ideas, it then sparks a little bit of a creative inside of you. But you have to understand that at the end of the day, you will, just by consuming, you'll never find your tribe. Right? You have to be able to create, because people want to hear. The information is not scarce anymore. You can learn on podcasts, blogs, YouTube channels, the TV. You can learn all these different ways. But the thing that allows us to connect with any of the content is the person who delivered it. What was their backstory and what was their lived expertise of how they found this? Because that's what's going to connect. You might be hearing me and you might say, oh my God, that epiphany came from when I heard Casanova say that in the corporate world, everybody could tell you no, but nobody could tell you yes. And reason being is because you might be in that position right now, that you're like, oh my God, I feel like I've been working my tail off for these last 5 years, 7 years, but I feel undervalued and underappreciated. And I need to figure out how I can control my own destiny. Now, that information has been all around, because you've been experiencing it for the last 5 years of these 7 years that you've been working there. But you heard it in a way that was able to connect. And then when you see, here's what I was able to do with that, here's how I was able to overcome, and here's how I was able to create a life by my design, you then say, oh my God, I want to link with him, or if it's someone else, her, to be able to see how I can do similar things to what they've done on my journey. And so that's what I would say. Understand that at the end of the day, we all want to have more influence. We all want to have more impact. And it doesn't mean that your goal has to be to impact the world, but it can be being the impact on your family. If you're trying to change the trajectory, if you know that you didn't come from financial literacy, that means that financial literacy must come from you. If you didn't come from self-love, self-awareness, then that means that self-love and self-awareness for your children, it must come from you. So you have to be the catalyst in changing those things. But the only way that happens is you have to be a creative. You have to put your lived expertise out there so somebody else can hear it. And maybe that somebody else is not 10,000 people where you're on a stage with Grant Cardone or Marie Forleo or anybody like that. Maybe it comes from your own household, because you're going to create the next Marie Forleo. You're going to create the next Oprah. And Oprah was just, again, she had a grandmother who wasn't focused on impacting the world. Her grandmother was focused on impacting her and her mind. And that's how your legacy will live on. So again, at the end of the day, understand, yes, we're consuming, but we're not consuming to just consume. We're consuming so we can create, so we can change the foundation for someone else.
I love that. And I think that's extremely powerful. And I think we all fall victim of that, probably a lot more than we'd like to admit. Is we oftentimes, I feel, and I know I have, is consume just to consume. And it's almost like, well, I've listened to this and I checked that podcast out. And not that there's anything wrong, obviously, with consuming, but to your point, to our listeners, don't consume just to consume. Consume to learn something, consume to get an advantage over the version of yourself yesterday. But I love that. And I know you and I have spoken about books, and we touched on it before we went live. So I know I'm going to ask, but have you read anything recently, or perhaps are you reading something right now that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, so there's 2 books, and when we talk about resilience and when we talk about perseverance, there's 2 books that have been huge for me over the last 6 months especially. Now, if somebody's just starting out and they're looking to really level up their mindset, they're looking to really have that belief, that hope, that dream. And so anybody who follows me, they know that I'm all about the dream and Dream Nation. But the first one that was for my path that was not any industry specific was there's 2 books right here, because I'm feeling like I just got a little pull in my heart. So I got to say 2. So the first one is The Millionaire Fastlane by MJ DeMarco. That was the first book. And then I think what really, accelerated that for me and really got me into that mindset was Rich Dad Poor Dad. But that was more on the investing side and understanding wealth. But first was MJ DeMarco, The Millionaire Fastlane. And then the second one, when you really start to get into personal development and you really want to learn like the foundation, it was The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. And that was so powerful for me. I absolutely loved it. That taught me how to believe, how to dream. That taught me everything. So The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. Now, over the last 6 months and over the last year, what has helped me elevate it and take it to the next level? I would give people 3 books, and I know you're asking for one. But I think that they all play a role, and they're going to hit people on different levels. So I always love to try to over deliver. The first one is The Power of Broke by Damon John. These are in any particular order, but that was a big one for me, The Power of Broke by Damon John. And so you might be in that space right now where you're trying to build something that's, just out of this world, but you're trying to figure out where to start. That's one. The other one would be The Third Door by Alex Banayan.
Great book.
Phenomenal book. I read that book. A good buddy of mine referred that to me and told me about it, and I read it, and oh my God, I read that book in 4 days. That was amazing. And then the last one, which is one that I'm currently reading right now, that I think has just been as impactful as the other two. It's called Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter by 50 Cent. And so a lot of people know him as this music rapper and everything else. But when you see inside of the mind of somebody who has built his brand and now been able to be around billionaires, and he actually, if you listen to books, he actually narrates the book himself, which I love that because, then you and Alex Banayan does the same thing, but then you really get the energy from that person. So, and I think Damon John did that on his too, The Power of Broke. So I would say all 3 of those books, if you're really saying, hey, I want to level up these next 6 months, I want to build my own foundation, all 3 of those books will help you to build a bulletproof mindset when it comes to adversity, resiliency, and just the power of a dream and harnessing that dream to turn whatever that dream is into a reality.
I love that, and I appreciate it. I asked for 1 book, and I got 5. So for our listeners, Casanova over-delivered on that. A fun question I started asking probably within the last month, I'm going to ask you as well, is the famous quote by Jim Rohn, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most of your time with. If I had the opportunity and I had the skill to grant you dinner and you could sit at a table with any 5 people, or dead or alive, who would you pick?
Yeah, first one, no question, would be Jay-Z. And I'm a huge fan of Jay-Z. He's been just the fact that in my lifetime, I was able to see him go from maybe 50,000 up to $1 billion, right? As a black man who comes from many of obstacles, being up in the Northeast like you are, I would say the first one would definitely be Jay-Z. The second one, I would say Kevin Hart. Similar things, like I've just felt like I've always had that connection with Kevin Hart. We're both young, we're both black, both short, right? And I think a little bit taller than Kevin Hart.
Nice.
But yeah, so he's given me a lot of inspiration on my journey, which would be amazing. The other one I would say would definitely be Oprah. And the reason why I say Oprah is because Oprah's she developed at a time where she had a lot of big goals and dreams. She was able to put that behind her and create a platform where she gave other people a voice. And that then in turn gave other people, she's launched careers off of her voice, right? But it wasn't her voice. It was more about she built a platform based off of relationships that was able to do it. And so I absolutely love that as well. As I've looked at the other 2, there's so many people, and I think that I would have said different people here or there, but I think as I look at the other 2, who am I always been a fan of that I have not gotten the opportunity to speak with, because I've had an opportunity to speak with a lot of these people, but if I could have dinner, I would say Michael Jordan would probably be one of them. And the reason why I say that is because I'm obviously a huge, but I would argue to say I believe before my time is up, I'll get Michael Jordan on my show. Right. And the only reason why I do believe that now, it is a tough feat. I'm not saying that it's easy, but because of the relationships that I've been able to build through my show, it feels like I just, I keep getting blessed. So I think that because he's still alive, yes, if I was able to get dinner with him, I guess I would probably still choose him. And the only reason why I say that is because, again, we all hear the stories about MJ, but being able to experience it and talk to him yourself is a totally different ball game, because we'll all say like, oh, Michael Jordan said, that it's more about the shots that he missed but I want to know from my own perspective, take me back to when you were in high school, when they cut, like, I want to hear that from myself, and I want to be able to deliver it. So I would probably say him. And then last but not least, I would probably say Joe Rogan. And the reason why I say that is because it's been said that he's been able to amass the single biggest audience of any one person. And we see it. I mean, Oprah's had a very big audience, but if you look at it right now, when we talk about loyalty, I don't know that anybody's ever had more loyalty to one person. That Joe Rogan show, it's great. Last year, and I learned the statistic from a YouTube person, like an actual corporate YouTube person. And I was watching a YouTube video, and they talked about, people looking, and I think he was the marketer of directing, or director of marketing. But they said, how do you build an audience and niches and everything? And if you look at it, he had the number 3 and it was either 7 or 5 shows that were watched. And all of his shows are like when we live in a world right now where TikTok's getting big, Reels are getting big, because the time attention span is getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
His episodes are like 4 days long.
Exactly. And so how is he getting people to watch these episodes? And a lot of these people you've never even heard of before. Right. But when they come onto his show, that means that you're instantly validated to be somebody. And he doesn't do anything crazy special. He just has conversations. And so I think I would want to know from his perspective, like how he's been able to do what he's been able to do. But I don't know if there's anybody else that stayed as authentic as he has through doing it. I mean, bringing on people he got Elon Musk to smoke weed on his show, which almost killed his brand from a corporate perspective. But Elon Musk being who he is, he was like, oh, I don't care. But Elon Musk isn't just going anywhere and smoking weed, right? He's just not, because he understands what that could do to his investors and everything else. And so I would say, especially the fact that we're in the podcasting world, I would say Joe Rogan.
So if you get Michael Jordan on your show, Michael is one of my 5 for my dinner. So I'm going to put this out there that if you get Michael, you have to deliver Michael for me, or else you're not allowed to get him. So that's just the way it is.
I believe that I will. I think that, especially over these next 2 years, I think that it's all the power of the leverage game. And I say this to anybody that's listening. For me, and this goes back to The Third Door by Alex Benayan. As I then leverage my brand and my story and everything else, I think that if you shoot for the moon, like, there's people out there that can get Michael, right, to do their show. And you've seen this because I was just looking this morning, and I don't know if you saw, but Elon Musk hosted a room, which from what I know is the biggest clubhouse room to date. And everyone was going crazy over that. But if you look at the guy who brought him on, his name is Sri. SRI, and you can look him up on Twitter, all these things, but he doesn't have a massive following. And I don't really even know what he does, but he's good friends with them. And so what that means is, again, harness the power of relationships over anything else. There's somebody else that's out there that if I build a good enough rapport with that person, and here's what happens. Once people become successful in life, you see it all the time. Some people, they can do this before they're truly successful, before they really have the money. But once you've already gotten it made, it no longer becomes about income, but it's really about impact.
I love that. Yeah, that's so powerful.
Yeah, it just, that's what it is. So there's somebody out there right now, and you read The Third Door by Alex Benayan, like the guy who was the computer guy that was working at Microsoft that he kept going back to. If you remember, I'm talking about his like mentor guy or whatever, Chi. His name was Chi in The Third Door. And that guy, he didn't want anything. He just wanted to see a young kid reach his goals and his dreams. So there's somebody out there that will connect me to Michael. But yes, I have to do the work, and it has to be worth Michael's time. But now Michael doesn't need anything. He just wants to make impact.
He just wants to be on my show first and your show second. So we'll figure that out.
We'll figure it out.
We're going to change lanes now to what we call our hot seat questions. And the only request we have of you is you spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Perfect.
Last meal, you get to pick absolutely anything. What do you pick?
Steak and shrimp.
Favorite smell?
Candle that my wife buys. She always buys the greatest candles. She does.
Favorite sport?
Basketball.
Favorite team?
Duke.
Ooh, favorite movie?
First thing that came to my mind was, there's so many of them, but the first thing that came to my mind was A Bronx Tale with Robert De Niro.
That's a fantastic. Chaz Palminteri, great movie.
Yes.
Favorite author?
Jack Canfield.
What is the favorite app you have on your phone?
What do I look? I feel like the first thing that came to my mind was Instagram.
What's the background picture on your phone?
It is it's something I'm holding myself to this year, which is I'm building out my real estate brokerage. And so it says, and it's basically my notes of something that I've committed to. So they're my goals on real estate for the year. So I have 3 goals. And what's cool about this is each of them align with the most powerful 2 words, where I guess there's 2 powerful words in the world that I believe. Number 1 is am, and number 2 is will. Right? So interchangeable. So for me, every single one of these 3 goals starts with I will, and then you also have I am in there. So that's what I like as well. So that's what I would say.
I love that. And I think that's a really cool idea. And it's the power of I am something and I will do it. Not I hope someday maybe. It's I am this or I will do this. Absolutely. Do you have an all-time favorite book?
The first thing that came to mind, it was the books that I've already told you about. I would also say, though, that a Cash Flow Quadrant was huge for me because, again, I didn't come from wealth. I didn't come from financial literacy. So Cash Flow Quadrant was really big in understanding what I'm trying to do. But there's so many good ones out there. If you're not going off one of the 5 that I've already named or one of the other books, I would say Cash Flow Quadrant.
And do you have a favorite quote?
I have lots of them. But I think the one that I most say a lot of the times is joy wouldn't feel so good if it wasn't for pain.
I think that's a very short but powerful quote. And Casanova, for our listeners who want to find out more about you, but also find out more about your 2 podcasts, could you please tell them about that and also share where they can follow you on social media?
Yeah, so you can follow me anywhere, Casanova with 1 S, Casanova _ Brooks or Casanova Brooks. That's where I am, LinkedIn, Facebook, everything. And then as far as where you can connect with me, either go to the website Casanova Brooks, but more so where I hang out and where the cool kids hang out is at dreamnation.com. That's where it has everything from my blogs, my guides, both of my podcasts, everything, our community. It's all at dreamnation.com.
So I'm not hanging out there. You saying I'm not a cool kid? That's nice. I appreciate that.
Well, you haven't put yourself in the circle yet.
Oh, all right. That's challenge accepted. And last question I have for you is the same question I ask everybody, is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Yeah, I believe that everyone has a dream, right? And those of us who dare to dream while the rest of the world is settling for what society will tell us or deem as our reality, we're the ones who stand to be trailblazers, change makers, innovators, and ultimately we make this world a better place. So for me, my parting words for you would be to go back to that 5-year-old self, that 9-year-old self, and what was the dream that you had? You always dreamed, and you dreamed big. You wanted to be an astronaut. You wanted to be a YouTuber. You wanted to be a basketball player. It didn't matter, but you never let anybody dumb down or kill your dream spirit. So you have to go back to that young spirit of you, and you have to reharness the power of dreaming and dreaming big, because that's how you'll have an impact on the world.
I love it. And I think that's a fantastic way to end today's episode. I truly, truly appreciate your time. And thank you for all that you shared. And I know that you and I will connect again soon.
Absolutely, my brother. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to episode number 328. Casanova recommended a couple of books. And in our continually increasing and forever improving and changing world of technology, I hope that we don't ever forget the true value and power in books. In his parting words, Casanova challenged us to dare to dream, to go back to our 5-year-old or our 9-year-old self and remember our dreams. I heard something on a YouTube video this past week that I wanted to quickly share with you. Aim small, miss small. So with that in mind, dream big, but go ahead and make sure that you take action. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time. and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.